In this video, I'm going to go over the Week 2 lab. I want to start in the Week 2 lab overview page. Here's where you can download the document that has the questions where you'll be filling in your answers. But also there's a great Excel how-to here. And I wanted to bring it up. This document will help with the lab, but also your homework. I've had a lot of questions already about how to do correlations and get regression lines with technology. If you go in this Excel how-to, and you come down here to where it talks about correlation coefficients and regression lines, it walks through the steps needed to calculate that in Excel. So this document will help with the labs, but also just in general as you work through your stat lab homework. If you don't have Word or Excel on your computer, there's information below about how you can get that. And then just to reiterate what it says here in the directions, the data is in the Files section. So you would go up here to Files, and then go to the labs here. So weeks 2, 4, 6 lab. And you'll see the database that's needed is posted right there. In this video, I'll be using a different database with some different values. So some of the setup will be exactly the same, but don't rely on my numbers. They will not match what your correct answer should be for yours. So here is the lab document for week 2. And I want to start by pointing out that this document will have step-by-step directions for how to solve each problem. And they're based off of Excel 2013. So it might be slightly different if you're using a different version of Excel. As mentioned in the directions, this lab starts off with just some introductory comments and explanations, and that you do not need to answer these original questions here. These are telling you on your data sheet, your Excel data sheet, these are what the questions actually stand for. So, for example, in Excel, you'll see drive miles. What that really is this question: how long does it take you to drive to school on average? So that was the question asked in the survey to get this data back. So you don't have to answer these. They're explaining what is in the Excel file. So here's where we start seeing the questions after the word frequency distribution. So question 1 says we want to create a frequency table for the variable state. So what state you were born in. In the Excel file, you can click on data and then sort. So it's telling us to go to the data tab up here and then sort. And then Excel asks you what you want to sort by. So we want to sort by state. And then we hit OK. It's going to be A to Z order. So Excel at this point has rearranged every single column. It keeps the rows intact, but has moved every data value for every column so that it's sorted based on state here. And to keep reading the directions, it says now we're trying to create that frequency distribution. So we're going to be able to just count how many people fall into each state. So for example, I have 4 people in California, 3 in Florida, and so on. So it says what we need to do next is from our table, use a calculator to determine the relative percentages as well as the cumulative percentages. So I scroll down to the bottom of my data. I see the number 36. There are really 35 pieces of data because I have one header row. So if I pulled up a calculator for relative percentages, if there's 4 people from California, 4 out of 35 gives me that this percentage of people is from California. So from Florida, I would do 3 divided by 35, and so on. I'm going to show now how you can use Excel to make that process even faster. So I've gone through all my states. I've got my frequencies here in column B. This is just a check. I did equal sum. Then you open your parentheses and you can select the data. And then when you close your parentheses and hit enter, it adds them up. So this was a little check to make sure I had 35 data values. So if you want to do that relative frequency, I can do B1, which is the number of people in California, and divide that by 35. Now I want to do every number here divided by 35, and Excel will pick up on the pattern if I just drag the bottom corner here all the way down. So it'll do, here it does B2 divided by 35. Here it does B3 divided by 35, and so on. So there you get the relative frequencies for every state really quickly. And you can also just check this. These should all add up to 1 or 100%. So that is the relative frequencies or relative percentages. And now for the cumulative percentages, we would want to just add these up. So how does it accumulate along the way? For example, after you've reached California, you have this percentage. And then when you throw in Florida as well, you want to add those two together. And then when you throw in Georgia, you want to add in all three of those. So take your answer from adding the two of them together and add in Georgia as well. And then add Illinois onto that, and so on until you've added all the percentages together. And so again, Excel can do this shortcut method. You'll see when you drag it down, it catches that pattern that you're trying to do. So here it's taking the next state and adding it to my previous total. And then so on. The next state, add it to the previous total. And you can see that it did it correctly because at the very end, when we've added all the states together, we have the cumulative percentage of 1 or 100%. You should be able to select your data here and hit Control C for copy, and then come back into your lab document and hit Control V for paste and get your data inserted into the document. Question 2, we're creating a bar chart for our frequency table from question 1. So it says we want to select the state variable values and then click on Insert and find the clustered column chart and click OK. And then we're going to add appropriate titles and axis labels. So coming in here, I want to select my states and their values, my frequency table. And then click on Insert. And I just have the picture here in my version, the Insert Column or Bar Chart. So that's where I want to go. And I'll just do the first one that comes up here, my column chart. And I have the states here. You'd want to click here on title and change your chart title. And then if the chart's selected, you can tell it's selected because it has those little dots around it. You can hit Control C and then come back in here and Control V to paste it. In question 3, we are creating a pie chart for the variable car, and these directions tell you the fastest and easiest way to do it. So select the column car, including the title. So I'm going to select it all. And then click on Insert, and here Recommended Charts. And it shows a clustered column. That's what it says it should show. Click OK. So we don't have a pie chart yet, but what we're going to do, once the chart is shown, right-click on the chart. So in here, right-click, and select Change Chart Type. And then select pie and OK. So we're going to change it to a pie, and we're going to hit OK. So again, you can right-click in the middle here, and you can add data labels. That's what you want to do. And you can add a appropriate title if you want to change that. And if you right-click right here, your data labels, you can format them further if you wanted to show those percentages instead of values, or both, or just percentages, and so on, to format your pie chart. In question 4, we are creating a histogram for our variable height. And we're going to use these classes here. And reading through the tips here, we're going to create a new worksheet in Excel by clicking on the plus along the bottom. So if you hit plus here, you get a new worksheet, and I've already done that. Sheet 3 popped up, and then you can type in the specified classes. And now what I'm going to do, just to make this a little easier for myself, I'm going to actually copy here, so Control C, come over to sheet 3, and just have all my heights right there. And then as it recommends here, you can sort the data based on the height variable. So I want to come here, as we did earlier, we want data sort, and we're going to sort by height, smallest to largest. So that's going to help me as I count to make sure I get the right values for each of these classes. So after I've gone through and counted how many fall into each bucket here, you can kind of verify these should all add up to 35, since there's 35 pieces of data. And then it tells us what to do to get our histogram. Select our frequency table, click on Insert, Recommended Chart, and choose our column chart shown and click OK. So select it, Insert, Recommended Charts, the column chart shown, and we're going to hit OK. Now histograms should have no gaps between the different bars, and so the directions explain how to make that happen. Right-click on one of the bars, select Format Data Series, and then we're going to change the gap width to 0. So I'm right-clicking here, Format Data Series, and off to the right came some options. I'm going to move my gap width down to 0%. And what that gives me is a proper-looking histogram where all the bars are touching. So change your chart title and then copy and paste that over to your answer sheet. Number 5, we're creating a stem and leaf chart for our variable money. And as it explains here, Excel can't do this type of chart. You can still use Excel to make this easier. I'm going to select my money, Control C for copy, and I'm going to go into a new sheet here and put it there so I can just focus on that, and again sort it to get started. And now your stem and leaf chart, it tells us we want to use the tens values as a stem and the ones value for the leaves. So your values for your tens can either be 0, and let me zoom in here a little bit so it's easier to see, but your tens can be either a 0, a 1, a 2, a 3, and so on. And then you'll want to see which data values fall into each of those groups. So if the tens are 0, the ones, what we have over here in our data, we have a 1, a 3, 3 5s, 3 7s, and a 9. And then if we type in for the leaves, what we have when our stem is a 1, we had a 0 and a 6. And then when our stem is a 2, we have a 0, a 0, a 1, a 3, and a 9 as our different leaves showing up in the data. So go through and do that for all of your data. In number 6, we're going to be creating a pivot table that's going to allow us to look at the heights of people broken up by gender. So the directions here, step by step, we want to click on Insert and then on Pivot Table. So Insert and then Pivot Table. And then it says we really only need the rows height through gender. So click in the top box and select all the data, including labels from height through gender. So originally all my data is selected, but I can just get just the height through gender, which will make it a little easier. There'll be a little less data thrown into my set there. So just height through gender. And then make sure we're opening this in a new worksheet and click OK. So the new worksheet button here and then click OK. And so that new worksheet opened up a new tab at the bottom just so I can keep everything separated. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit there. So we got a new tab because we clicked on new worksheet. So off to the right, I'm going to have to adjust my width. There we go. On the right of the new sheet, you see height and gender and sleep, because sleep was in our data too, but we really just want to work on with height and gender, so just select those two boxes. And then it says make sure gender is in the rows and height is in the values box. So if we go further down here, we have rows and values. Now those can just be dragged and dropped. So if yours are backwards, switched around, so gender's in the rows and heights is in the values box. And then click on the drop down arrow next to height and value field settings, and we're going to first look at the average of these heights. So right now we have the sum of all the females, their heights, and the sum of all the males, their heights. But we want to click on this drop down arrow, value field settings, change it from sum to average. So now we get the average height in inches for the females and males. We're going to do that again and change it to look at the standard deviation. So we're going to click there, value field settings, and change it from the average. We're going to change it to the standard deviation. So now we get the standard deviation for the females and the males. And the lab's going to finish with some short answer questions. All your answers should be given in complete sentences. So you're going to reflect back a little bit on some of the charts and graphs you made, what analysis you can get from that, what information it might be showing about the data. Some of these questions refer to include the shape, to talk about the shape of the distribution. In Chapter 2, it talks about shapes of distributions here, and you can talk about whether they're skewed one way or the other, uniform, symmetric, and so on. In the last two questions, we're talking about the mean and the standard deviation of when we compared the heights of males and females. So discuss a little bit about what those data values mean, what information you can get from those, and refer back to what mean and standard deviation are actually trying to show us. So mean is discussed in Chapter 2. And right at the beginning of this section, it talks about how the mean is a measure of central tendency. It's trying to represent a typical or central entry of the data set, and it shows how the mean is calculated. So talk about what those means can tell you, and then for the standard deviation, that's discussed in the measures of variation section, page 83 here in the book. And you need to know what deviation means. It's measuring how far away data is from the mean. And then it talks more about how standard deviation is calculated, and just talks about how the standard deviation, the smaller it is, it means the data is more clustered around the mean, closer to the mean. And the larger standard deviations mean the data is more spread out, away from the mean. So in terms of our heights of our male and females, our average heights and our standard deviation for them, what can we gather about how spread out that data is based off of the standard deviation? So after you've completed all those problems, come back to Canvas and submit here in the week 2 lab. If you have questions or get stuck on anything, let me know. I'll be happy to help.